All right, I think we're ready to go.
Excellent. So let me kick it off.
Sure.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Scott Teeter. I'm the Division Chief for the Financial Crimes Division, and I'm also the Chair of the Michigan Elder Abuse Task Force. This is a training on Safta, the Senior Abuse Financial Tracking and Accounting program developed by the United States Department of Justice, and they're helping us out today by doing the training on Safta. This is going to be recorded. It'll be then available on a link that we'll be setting up through, I believe, MyTrain. Our two presenters today are Karen Webber, who is a certified public accountant and certified fraud examiner. As a forensic accountant, she developed for the Elder Justice Initiative at the U.S. Department of Justice to the Safta program. And Jim Foley, who's Vice President of the Curriculum Development and Training Section of the National White Collar Crime Center. Jim provides technical assistance to the user of Safta. So if you encounter any issues while using Safta, reach out to him, and Jim is available to answer those technical questions. So without further ado, I thank both of them for their assistance in this. It's long been a issue for us in providing this type of training to law enforcement, because that's often the barrier to prosecuting the financial exploitation cases that we see, is the ability to crunch the numbers. And law enforcement, that's not our primary training, and not really our primary skill set. Same thing with prosecutors. I really believe that this tool, we've worked with it a bit at the Attorney General's office, should help that process go much smoother, and then provide you the ability to take the case, put together the number side of it, take it into the prosecutor, and then lay it out. And hopefully from that, we'll get more successful prosecutions. So Karen and Jim, thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for tuning in on this Friday. It's nice and warm up here in the Northeast. Hopefully it is where you are too. Today, I'm going to walk you through the Safta tool, like Scott said. And this program was developed through a partnership we have with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, with funding from the Elder Justice Initiative at the DOJ. And our colleagues at the DOJ came to me in January of 2018 asking, how can they create a tool that would assist investigators like you guys with your financial exploitation cases? Maybe some experienced investigators have a deep background in Excel and data analysis, and they're able to navigate these cases really easily. Maybe you have some OCR software and other programs to analyze data. But for many others, without either this skill set or the software to do it, financial exploitation cases are a challenge. So it was interesting for me to take a step back and think about, what are my processes for working these cases, in really basic terms. And of course, the understanding was this tool had to be built on a platform that was pretty much universally available. So Excel, in that case, made the most sense. The IACP and I built this draft Excel workbook that performs really the very basic functions necessary to start a financial exploitation case. We took the workbook to a VBA who could write code over the spreadsheet such that a user could navigate the workbook without any real basic Excel knowledge. So thus the tool was born, and as Scott mentioned, it's now being managed by the National White Collar Crime Center, and I'll give you the contact information for them at the end of this training. So today I'll walk you through the Senior Abuse Financial Tracking and Accounting tool known as the Safta. And the Safta, really creatively by our team, is a Hebrew word for grandmother, so very fitting. The Safta consists of two parts, and they're meant to be used in conjunction with each other. There's the Safta guide and the Safta tool. And the guide that I'm about to show you walks the user through a financial exploitation investigation, and ultimately through the use of the Safta Excel-based tool as well. So after walking through the guide, I'll go on and demonstrate the functionality of the tool. So bear with me as I navigate there. This is the Safta guide. It consists of 4 main sections. There's a piece identifying financial exploitation. There's a piece on gathering financial records, analyzing bank statements, of course, with the use of the Safta tool, and finally presenting financial evidence if the case goes forward to prosecution. The guide, as you can see, has some helpful checklists, instructions, call out boxes with reminders, for an investigator trying to navigate a typical case. This includes on this particular page, some questions for the alleged victim, some questions for other involved parties, whether that's a neighbor or a caregiver who may not be the suspect. But in addition to, what you're asking the individuals, there's also a checklist that covers, things you observe in the home while you're doing a welfare check or while you're doing a home visit. There's a really great checklist on gathering financial records. And not just financial records in the sense of, bank statements and investment accounts, but, other helpful documents like tax returns, credit reports, anything from a public record search. All of these documents together help form, a really complete case file. And then, of course, once those records come in, the Safta guide helps you analyze the bank statement through the use of the tool, again, which I will walk you through. Reminders, of course, exist in there. It is an Excel workbook, so you do have to save your work. Hopefully, many of you, like I do, just have an auto save function, and it will do that automatically. Those of you who are familiar with things like pivot tables and slicers, which exist within the tool, you may not need these step-by-step instructions, but those who aren't familiar at least have this guide to really walk you through step-by-step what you're entering, why you're entering, and what you should be looking for. So finally, toward the end of that guide is advice on involving experts. And presenting the evidence if you think you might need experts to assist with your case. So that is the Safta guide. That exists on the IACP website. There's a link to it at the end of this presentation. Let me get back to this. Now the tool itself, it is an Excel-based workbook. And it was built to support the financial exploitation investigations by giving you a more streamlined method for data entry and transaction analysis. When used with the Safta guide, you can perform some of the steps that, say, a forensic accountant like me might use in a financial exploitation case, and then document that work along the way so that when you turn the file over to someone like a prosecutor, they can understand exactly what you did and why. So in terms of the slides, I'm giving you a broad strokes overview here, and then we'll move on to an actual demonstration. When you sign into the Safta workbook, you'll be prompted to enter a username and a password that you create so that you can control access to that confidential information. Once entered, you're automatically taken to the Welcome tab of the workbook. And the workbook itself contains 9 buttons that control the inputs and help you navigate the case file. Those buttons include suspect and victim data entry, entering bank account information. Obviously, I'll go through all of these. And then there are additional buttons like show case details. Once you enter, all of that information in, there's like a 1-page case summary printout you can hand over to a prosecutor. There's a button in there to help you navigate to the administrative tab. That's where you can customize different options inside the file, like who has access to the workbook if there's multiple users, or maybe the specific fields that you want to pop up in drop-down boxes. You can control that if you wish to. I think we have it set it up pretty easily and easy to understand, but again, these customizable features exist if you want to dive into that. And of course, if you have a workbook that you need to clear all the data and start over, there's a button where you can do that in one click. In the Enter Case Details field, when you hit that button, you're going to be prompted to enter things that you keep in your normal file, like a case number. Of course, we'll document what the victim's name is, who's the investigator on the file. There's a section for notes. Maybe you want to put in where the referral came from or any other information that might be helpful to capture within the workbook. You can enter the investigation start date and also the end date if those are things that you guys are tracking in terms of time to completion. And also the number of suspects, because as we know, in many of these cases, certainly when scams are involved, the number of perpetrators may be more than one. In the enter bank account information, which I'll show you shortly, you enter information such as account number, the financial institution, the account type, any account owners, is it individual or joint, who are the owners? Is the victim the owner? Is it the suspect? Is it both of them? Do we not know? We're aware that this account exists, but we haven't got specific ownership information yet. Certainly that information will come back with our subpoenaed records. You can fill that in later. There's also a bank statement summary data tab. This is kind of your high level summary of the ins and outs over a period of months. Again, I'll show you this shortly, but high level, you're going to enter things like statement date, the beginning balance in the account, anything you would see on page 1 of your bank statement, that high level, here are the total deposits for the period. If they're broken down in more detail, there's space for you to enter them there. Here are your total withdrawals and your ending balance. And once you get this, even this summary data in and look at it chronologically, some patterns might emerge that will point you in the direction of where your case needs to go next. So this data that you enter chronologically will automatically populate that statement summary tab. And again, that summary tab just shows the chronological activity in terms of account balances and maybe some summary activity as they're summarized on the face of the statements. In that tab, as I'll show you, you can highlight areas of concern. You can edit some numbers that you may have entered incorrectly. And you can also make notes on important facts or changes in patterns right on the face of that file. So if a supervisor goes in and is reviewing your work, they can see little notes on specific items. So that's really helpful. If you decide, based on what you see in the summary data tab, that you want to drill down and take a closer look at specific transactions, there's a space for you to enter a transaction specific data, like the statement date that it came from, the actual transaction or post date in the case of a bank account, whether that transaction is a deposit or a withdrawal. Distinguishing between those two is really important once we get to the data analysis phase, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. Transaction type, that might be maybe an EFT payment, a check, an ATM card withdrawal. If it's a check, you can indicate what the check number is, and you can check things like sequence of the numbers, whether it was skipped, whether there might have been multiple checkbooks in play by taking a closer look at that check number field. Obviously, you're going to record your payor or payee information in there as well, and the amount. These are the basics. I say that the important elements are really on the left-hand side, the statement date to amount. Get that basic information in, and that's a key component of the case. If you want to go forward and look at other information in more specific terms, you can enter things like location. We like to use the location field for ATM withdrawals, for example. And does it make sense that an older adult might have used this ATM that's 50 miles away? Recording things like location will help you observe those patterns. Certainly, if you want to record the memo lines of checks, we might use the memo line a lot when we have a caregiver being paid by check, and they may indicate the hours and dates worked in that memo line. And does that make sense based on the amount that they're being paid? You can record the signature, who was signing for that specific withdrawal. The endorsement as well. If it was a check payable to cash, who endorsed it? And the endorser is the last holder of that cash. And maybe you would be able to attribute that to the victim or the suspect accordingly. There's also a field for the bank stamp. We like to look at this because in the case where, say, a check is written to the suspect, the suspect deposits it to their checking account, the bank stamp might tell us at what bank they have a checking account, and in some cases, what account number. And then we know where to send the next subpoena. So you don't have to use these fields, in totality, but if you want to, they're available. Once you get all of that transaction information in, a pivot table is automatically created. And for those of you who aren't familiar with pivot tables, we'll show you what one looks like when we get to the demonstration. But essentially, it organizes and sums up your data chronologically, so you can easily see the transaction patterns across time, and that allows for a quicker, more efficient analysis of the activity in account in a given period. We have slicers in there. So you can just click these little buttons and then narrow down the data you're looking at by time period. Maybe you want to look at years or quarters, or you want to look only at checks or ATM withdrawals. The slicers will help you do that. The Safta guide that I showed you earlier offers more considerations for your review of the pivot table tab, different tips and tricks to help you navigate that and look at data in a different way. So definitely use those two things, the guide and the tool, in conjunction, because it's really helpful. Once all your data is in, summary and transaction level, the dashboard has a bunch of charts and graphs that will automatically populate. It covers things like, timeline and how much spending was done in the account versus how much income came into the account. Again, I'll show you shortly. You can even create your own. We have the option for line graphs, bar graphs, pie charts. So you don't necessarily need to know how to create these in Excel. You can click a few buttons within the Safta and it will create it for you. So I'm going to demo the tool for you. And bear with me as I navigate there. Once you log in, your Welcome tab, as I described, looks like this. If you follow the Safta guide, you would have met with your victim, most likely, taken a statement, and then subpoenaed the relevant financial institution records. So when those come back, you're ready to use the tool. You might use the Enter Case Details field to enter your case number, CR 2020-01. You tab to the next field. You can enter the victim's name. You can put the investigator in there. Maybe this case came from APS and you want to document that. Maybe put the caseworker's information in there if you need further details from them. You can put the start date, the end date, and the number of suspects, in our sample case maybe is 1. You hit input case details and all that information is captured in the file here on the case details tab. Then you'll go on and enter information on either the victim or the suspect using this drop-down tool. You can enter the victim's name. Maybe in this case, we'll call him John Smith. You can write his address, his telephone number. You can record gender, his date of birth, who's his POA. Where did it come from? We just recorded that as APS earlier. And there's even a narrative component for the summary of abuse. What was the complaint that came in? And then you click input data. It will ask you, do you want to input another suspect or victim? In this case, yes, we've only entered data on the victim, so we want to put the suspect information in there as well. And you can fill it out as completely or incompletely as you want to and go back and edit that information as that changes. As you know, sometimes you get information in the beginning of the case that doesn't really match information that comes through later on. So you can always go back and edit that. So in this case, our victim data is in, our suspect data is in. We don't want to open another one. All of that information would be captured here in our suspect and victim details tab. Once those basics are in, we can set up accounts. And you would do that using the Enter Bank Account Information tab. For each account you enter using this Enter Bank Account Information button, a new tab will be created in the workbook for both the statement summary function and the transaction summary function. So for example, if I enter in account number 1234 here, say I call it First Bank, I choose a checking account, I record who the owner is. Of course, he is the victim. Input account summary. If you watch below, I don't want to add another account. It's created this transaction data tab and a statement summary tab, which we'll fill out in a moment. So you can enter as many accounts as you like, and it will keep creating these tabs. So once you have the basic file set up, there are a number of different approaches you could take using the tool. You might start by summarizing the summary data that appears on the face of the bank statement, like we talked about earlier. When you choose entering any kind of transaction or statement data, that account you just created will pop up here in this dropdown. You can record things like the statement date. Maybe it was January 31st of 2011. Our beginning balance was around $5,000. If the first page of our statement shows that the victim had, say, $2,300 of deposits during the period, maybe the first page of the statement only summarized my deposits over the month, the withdrawals, and something like fees. I might put my withdrawals in here. And then enter in my ending balance. I just lost my page here. Let me do some quick math. Once that's in, you hit Input Statement Summary. And it will ask you, do you want to add another statement? Now, typically when we request records, we're getting multiple months back. So you would hit yes, you want to enter data for the next month. But in our case, for purposes of the example, I'll just hit no. And then you can see that information is already tabulated into the Statement Summary tab. In some cases, we may want to just summarize the summary data. We're looking at total deposits, total withdrawals, maybe fees and ending balances. And that's enough to see whether any high-level patterns emerge that might cause us to take a deeper dive into one or more specific transaction areas. Maybe we know we just want to look at ATM transactions because the suspect had the ATM card. Maybe we just want to look at payment or check payments because they were only using the checks. You can do that, or narrow that down and use the transaction data tab for that. Maybe you're going to skip the statement summary function altogether because you already know where you're going to look and you don't need to use that step. Or maybe you're going to do both because that's going to give you the clearest picture of what happened. So for purposes of this demonstration, we will do both. On the Enter Transaction Data tab, you'll select the account that the transaction took place in, put the statement date in. For the first statement we looked at, we know it ended January 31st, and then your actual transaction date or the date that that transaction took place. You'll indicate whether it's a deposit or a withdrawal. Maybe it was Social Security income that the individual gets every month for about $2,000. You can put the amount, that's in the check number field, I'm sorry. So it's a deposit of Social Security number. If it was a check, for example, we would select checks and put the check number in. And then we put the amount. If it was an ATM withdrawal, we chose, maybe we'd like to record the location. If it's a check, the memo line, if we want to track that information. Signature field is here. If there was an endorsement, bank stamp, all of those fields that we talked about going through the presentation. But the best part of right here is for every transaction you enter, say for example, that the victim did not use an ATM card, and this happened to be an ATM transaction. You can assign it to the victim, the suspect, both unknown, other. And when we get to the end, the dashboard is going to track all of the transactions that you assigned to either the victim or the suspect, and they're going to put it in a nice chart to show you how much more spending was for the benefit of the suspect than the victim, if that is in fact what happened. So then you hit Input Transaction Data. It will ask you again, do you want to input another one? For purposes of this demonstration, no. And you can see if you navigate to the Transaction Data tab that that's already in there. So once your data is all in, I'll navigate back. Your statement summary might look something like this. So we're able to see how the beginning balance changed over time. We can see that it's typically around $11,000. It increases a little here, but then all of a sudden in September, it drops below. Why is that? If we click here on an actual cell, we can make a comment. Maybe it's a question. Why did this drop? Or if we just want to call attention to it, we can click highlight cell, click amend value, and there's our information. So just looking at the information in this way helps us pinpoint areas to look next. What happened between August and September of 2011? Let's go to that statement and look at in detail. I can see in August, $6,800 worth of checks happened. Well, his normal check rating was around the $3,000 mark. So what happened? In our transaction data tab, we'll be able to drill down and see that. So once all that transaction data is in, like I said, both the pivot table tab and the dashboard tab will populate automatically. The pivot table tab looks like this. So it sums all of the different types of transactions that you had, whether it was a deposit or a withdrawal by their type. And it also captures the information that you may have recorded, such as checks to cash, who the check was paid to. In this case, cash, his homeowners association, a cable company, and you can analyze the patterns across time. So, we know this individual maybe gets Social Security of $1057 every month. That doesn't change over the year that we looked at. Veterans benefits, $2,600, those don't change, but maybe when we're looking at the data like this, we find that in some months it wasn't being deposited. We're going to ask the question, right? What happened to those checks? Did someone else take them? Are they home, not deposited, sitting in his desk somewhere? It just lets us ask different questions that we may not have really readily observed if we were picking through those statements one after the other. Certainly checks to cash varied throughout the period and jumped to $3,000 in July. We know from looking at the statement data tab that things started to get a little funky between July, August, September. And again, something like ATM withdrawals, if you tracked the location, you would see that maybe this victim regularly took out cash at this one particular corner store. But as of November, another location was in play. Why is that? Did he ever go there? Or was that a place the suspect would have gone? So tracking all the information like this is helpful, and the pivot table tab does a great job summarizing it. I talked about the use of slicers. If, say, we only wanted to look at, months or years, we can move the slicers to take a look at that data. Maybe we only want to look at Q2 of 2011, and then your pivot table is going to automatically adjust to show that activity. Maybe the suspect wasn't involved in Q1, and so we know this is the client's baseline spending. How does that compare then to the spending that happened in Q2 or even Q3? Pivot table slicers also let you narrow down the different types. Maybe we only want to look at ATM withdrawals or something like that. So clearing the filters then gets you back to your initial pivot table data. But what the VBA vendor was able to do is put these boxes in here so you don't have to know how to create a pivot table or how to navigate one. You can use these little tools within this tab. And the other item that gets automatically updated in addition to the pivot table is the dashboard function. These are all the charts and graphs that are created as soon as you put that data in. Again, this shows balance of account, how it declined maybe after our suspect got involved. That's a great piece of visual evidence. Withdrawals far exceeded deposits. So he was spending more than he was making, and maybe is that a normal habit? We'll show that same graph in a line chart. And then withdrawals by type. And you can edit these charts by selecting different fields to show different items. So that, in a nutshell, is the Safta tool. Thank you for tuning into the training. If you have questions, like we talked about, I will pull up the slide that shows Jim Foley's contact information. If you have any questions or comments on the tool as you're using it, or feedback, Jim can take those by email, jfoley@nw3c.org. And the Safta tool itself, as well as a complete video tutorial on the different tools functions, are available at the IACP's website, theIACP.org/elder-abuse.